Welcome aboard, shipmates. This is Shanty Talk, the place where you can learn about all those weird sailor terms and obscure references that traditional shanties are full of. My name is Jerry Bryant, and I'll be your captain professor on this voyage through the Shanty Ocean. My aim is to help you get more joy out of singing shanties by giving you some context for why these songs were created, how they were used, what do the strange words mean, and where on the planet are all those places that they mention. Now, in this series, I'll be talking mostly about traditional shanties, which are work songs created by sailors and longshoremen to help with the heavy work on board a sailing ship. First, though, it's good to know that there are two main types of sea songs, shanties and forebidders. Now, shanties are songs that were used only for work on a ship or while loading cargo. Sailors did not sing them in pubs, I'm afraid, but we can. And forebidders were non-work songs that they sang off watch, which means when they weren't on duty. And for a sailor, any song that he liked was fair game to be a forebidder. Popular songs, ballads, folk songs, minstrel songs, drinking songs, hymns. Just like you would play your favorite songs on a playlist, a sailor would sing whatever songs caught his fancy and then he bothered to learn. Now you may ask, why is shanty spelled two different ways? Truth is, nobody knows. The Yanks tend to use the CH spelling, while the Brits use the SH spelling. You can take your pick. My preference is for Chantey because there is no other meaning for that word, whereas shanty means a sailor work song, and it also means a shack or a hut. Now, sailors would sometimes sing forebidders as shanties. They would also adopt songs they heard on shore to be shanties as well. One great example is Stephen Foster's song Camptown Races, which sailors turned into the Gold Rush era shanty, Banks of the Sacramento. Though I will say that there are some scholars who think maybe it was the other way around, that Foster heard sailors singing a shanty and then he borrowed the tune to make his own song. We will never know. The shanty we're going to dig into today is called Spanish Ladies. It was originally a forebidder sung in ships of the British Royal Navy. It was first written down, as far as we can tell, in 1769, oddly enough, in the logbook of an American ship. Now, you know, if it was written down in 1769, it had been around for quite some time before that. Because back in the days when songs were transmitted orally, there was no recording. A person had to write the song and sing it. Somebody else had to hear it and like it, and then learn it, and they had to sing it. And then somebody else had to hear it and learn it and sing it, and so on. So it took quite a while for a song to become really popular. And Spanish Ladies was really popular. It got turned into a shanty in the early 1800s, most likely, sometime between, say, 1810 and the 1840s or 50s, which was the golden era of the creation of shanties. The folk process is something you may hear about, and it's what happens to songs when they are not written down but are transmitted orally from person to person. And Spanish Ladies got folk processed a lot. The original version is a minor key, talks about British sailors and land points on the English coast. But there is an American whaling version that is in a major key and talks about sailing into New Bedford Harbor. So things like that happen all the time with these songs. And even the original version, though the tune hasn't changed much, there are variants in terms of the words that are used in the different verses. That's just how it worked back in those days. I'm going to focus on the original British version. It describes a voyage home from the Mediterranean, somewhere in Spain, back to England, to the mouth of the Thames River in Dover. And even this original version has lots of these little variants. So I picked one, it's the one I like, and we'll break this down. So I'm going to take it verse by verse. I'll tease apart all the different terminology, and hopefully you'll come out with a new understanding of this song. So let's man the capstan and get that mud hook off the bottom. Farewell and adieu to you Spanish ladies, farewell and adieu to you ladies of Spain, for we've received orders to sail for old England. We hope in a short time to see you again. Now the song's Navy origins are, there's a clue in the third line of that first verse. We've received orders to sail for old England. That's naval terminology. The merchant ships tended not to use that kind of phrase, receiving orders. So that's our first clue. There are others that show up in the song as well. There was a very important British naval base in Gibraltar, which is on the south coast of the Iberian Peninsula. And so we can imagine that this ship was heading back home from the base in Gibraltar with the fleet, and the men were headed home and were feeling pretty good, even though they had had a good time with the Spanish ladies. Next comes the eminently singable chorus. We'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors. We'll rant and we'll roar all on the salt seas until we strike soundings in the channel of old England. From Ushant to Scilly 'tis 35 leagues. So one of the reasons the crew might have been ranting and roaring as they sailed was that the British Navy at that time served out to each man in the crew a pint of strong rum every day. They called it the tot, and that continued right up into I think the 1960s or 70s. It was a sacred ritual. Now, if they served just straight rum, it was called rum. If they mixed it with water, it was called grog. And if you want to learn more about the origins of the term grog and some recipes and other tasty tidbits like that, there's a great video on the How to Drink YouTube channel. Go search that up, find out, and look for their episode called Wellerman, Shanties, and Grog. Be well worth your time. The next line is, until we strike soundings in the channel of old England. And that means they had reached the continental shelf and they were able to measure the depth of the water that they were sailing over to give them an idea where to stay away from the shallows, and so they wouldn't get wrecked. They did this by a process called heaving the lead. And the sailor in this picture is about to heave the lead, which means throw the lead. It was a 6-pound hunk of lead attached to a long piece of rope called a line. And this is how they figured out, okay, are we safe? Can we go forward here? Then the next line is, from Ushant to Scilly is 35 leagues. And Ushant is an island off the coast of France, off Cape Finisterre. And the Isles of Scilly are the very southwestern tip of England, right off the tail end of Cornwall. So it's like that demarcates the western entrance to the English Channel. And a league is about 3 miles or so. So Ushant to Scilly being 35 leagues, that's roughly 100 miles, pretty wide. Oh, a little fun fact for you, trivia, if you're into that. The French call the English Channel La Manche, which means the sleeve. And when you look at a map of England and France, you see that the channel that's a pretty good description for the English Channel. We hove our ship to with a wind from sou'west, boys. We hove our ship to for to strike soundings clear. It's 45 fathoms with a white sandy bottom. We squared our main yard and up channel did steer. So we got some good sailor language in this verse. We hove our ship to. Now that was a way of parking the ship at sea. So they needed to stop moving so they could strike soundings clear, heave the lead. So I'm going to attempt to illustrate what that looks like with a little Jerry built and jury rigged model that I made, and I looked those terms up. And Jerry built means made with inferior or cheap materials, and jury rigged means put together for temporary use, and both of those apply in this situation. But the idea was that a ship would be sailing, and the sails would be oriented to catch the wind, so the ship could move in this direction. But if they wanted to stop, so they could lower a boat or strike soundings, heave the lead, what they would have to do is change the orientation of one of the sails. And usually the mainsail was the one they did because that was the biggest sail. They would brace the yard around, the main yard around, so that it was perpendicular to the foresail. And that would then make the ship come to a standstill. Now, it could be that the ship did point up into the wind a little bit. I'll confess I'm not a sailor, a square-rigged sailor, so I have a lot of book knowledge here. But essentially, it was putting the ship aback was changing the angle of the mainsail so that the ship was no longer moving. The next line is for to strike soundings clear, and that goes back to what we heard in the earlier in the chorus, heaving the lead to figure out what was down below them, how deep it was. Now in this verse we learn that it's 45 fathoms with a white sandy bottom. The lead that they heaved had a line attached to it, very long line, and every 6 feet on that line was a piece of yarn or a piece of leather, because 6 feet equaled a fathom. And so therefore 45 fathoms is 260 feet. So this is a lot shallower than the blue ocean that they were crossing up until now. So it lets them know that they're into the channel proper, and they now have to pay attention for, possibility of hitting rocks or sandbars. But you may ask, how did they know it was a white sandy bottom? Because 260 feet is too deep to see through. Well, these clever blokes had figured out that if they put some fat, something sticky on the bottom of the lead, they could bring up some of the sea bottom. And so in this picture of the lead, you'll see that there is a hole in the bottom of the lead, and they would stuff that with beef tallow or lard. And when it hit the bottom, whatever was down there would stick to it. So they'd haul it back up and they could see, oh, it's the white sand that we would expect here at the entrance of the channel. So now that they know where they are, they square their main yard and up channel did make. And so back to our Jerry built model, they can change the direction of the mainsail by hauling on the braces to turn the main yard around. The wind now catches in all the sails, and off they go up the channel. Which brings us to the next verse. Well, the first land we sighted, it is called the Deadman. Next rammed that off Plymouth, Start, Portland, and White. We sailed on by Beachy, by Fairley and Dungeness, and then we bore up for the South Foreland Light. So this is basically a set of directions for going up the English Channel to Dover. So that trip's about 340 miles, and depending on the wind and the tides, that could take anywhere from a week to a month. Now the signal was given for the grand fleet to anchor, and all in the Downs that night for to lie. Let go your shank painter, likewise your cat stopper. Haul up your clue garnets, let tacks and sheets fly. Oh, so now we're getting some good sailor terms in this verse. So another clue to the naval origins of this song shows up in the first line. And the signal was given for the grand fleet to anchor. Merchant ships generally didn't travel in fleets, so it's likely this was a naval fleet. And all in the Downs that night for to lie. The Downs were are still a famous anchorage just around the corner from Dover. where they're out of the predominant southwest winds. And that was the safest place for them to anchor once they were back home. Then we get into some lovely technical stuff. Let go your shank painter, likewise your cat stopper. These are referring to the anchor itself and parts of the anchor. So I'm going to show you a photograph of an anchor on a historic ship. And the cat stopper is a very short but stout line attached to the ring right up near the top. And that keeps the anchor from dropping down. You'd have to let that go in order to let the anchor hit the ground, hit the water. And then the shank of the anchor is the long piece between the crossbeam, which was called the stock, and the curved pointed flukes there at the bottom. And the shank painter was used when the anchor was stored while they were sailing up against the side. It was stored horizontally, and the shank painter went around that shank. It was another short but thick piece of rope to keep the anchor safe against the side of the ship. Now, a little trivia for you cat lovers. You heard the term cat stopper, and there were a number of references to feline-like objects relating to the anchor. Now, don't confuse this with the cat o' nine tails, which was a infamous whip used to punish sailors. That's something else entirely. But in the photo, you see there's this stout piece of timber projecting from the side of the ship. That's called a cat head. And so a lot of the different parts of the anchor relate to that cat head. And that comes from way back in the olden days, the ships had carved lion heads on the ends of these timbers. Now, the next line is, haul up your clew garnets, let tacks and sheets fly. And here we're talking about the sails. A little bit of a graphic to orient you to that. The circled and underlined parts are what's referred to in the verse. And the clew garnets were tackles at the bottom of the sail. And tackle was the sailor pronunciation of that word. We tend to say tackle, but I have it on very good authority that it was called tackles by sailors. And they were used, the clew garnets were used to pull up the corners of the sail towards the mast when they were getting ready to furl the sail or stow the sail when they didn't need to use it anymore because they were at anchor. And then the tacks and the sheets, you'll see in the graphic, those were lines attached to those same corners that went both fore and aft, and they were used to help trim the sails so that the ship could take the best advantage of the wind. And obviously, you don't want those stretched tight if you're furling the sail. So those were let go and flew into the wind so that they could bring the ship to an anchor. And then we come to the final verse. Now let every man toss off his full bumper, and let every man toss off his full glass. We'll sing and be jolly and drown melancholy, and here's to the health of each true-hearted lass. I don't think I need to explain much of what's going on here. Sailing, being a sailor was thirsty work, and when they got home and got a chance to go ashore, they were happy to drink to their heart's content. Now, it's kind of surprising that a pint of rum a day wasn't really enough to content their heart, but that's why we love sailors, I think. But it's possible that when the men were ashore enjoying some rare leisure time, they might have made the old sailor's toast, which goes, "To our sweethearts and wives, may they never meet." Well, there you have it. Go forth and sing this shanty anew, but try not to top at the knob with your superior sailorly knowledge. Remember, it's nice to be important, but it's important to be nice. I recorded this song on an album called Roast Beef of Old England, along with my mates in the Starboard Mess. You can find heaps of versions of it on YouTube. And if you want to stream it or download the whole album or any of the songs, It's available on Spotify and iTunes and Amazon, etc., ad infinitum. If you really need to kill some time, then you can row over to my website, which is jerrybryantSings.com. I intend to keep this series going, explicating other great shanties, so don't hesitate to subscribe if you want to keep learning. Until then, I wish you fair winds and following seas.